What's up, everyone? We're back with another fantasy football video. Week 9 start-sit fan mailbag questions. So fans who commented on my videos this week get their questions answered in today's video in preparation for Week 9. So if you want to take advantage of this for future weeks, I don't have a lot of subscribers to take advantage of that. I reply to all my fans and help them with their fantasy football content. So please take advantage of that. Consider commenting, or subscribing to the channel if you're interested in fantasy football as well as other types of videos as well. So before we get into the fan questions, I have questions for you as fans who watch this channel. I would like your input in terms of how to improve the fan mailbag and start-sit video. So in general, the way I've been doing it is I've been doing it as a comparative format. So you have questions of particular players of who to start. So I'll give 2 or 3 players as an example and try that out. Basically see if you have a decision of such and such people on your roster, who do you pick? So I've been doing that as my follow-up video. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different where I look at the most common questions for players that are going into Week 9, given injuries, given new roles, etc. So I'm going to try that out for this week. But for those of you who've been watching, let me know what you enjoy from this channel and what works well for you. In general, I've noticed that my strategy videos that I release on Tuesday tend to do the best in terms of viewership and comments. So for those of you that do watch the videos, please let me know what you think works for you in these videos, what you like, what you recommend could be improved, because I'm still very much a new channel and developing the format of this. So for future seasons, please let me know what you would like to see, or as we're going through the rest of the season, particular advice that you would like to get insight on, and I could tailor that, especially as we're getting to the stretch of this season and then even preparing for next season and beyond. So let me know, as fans, you guys have a large role in that. So now we will go to the fan comments and questions for this week. And I'm going to answer these questions in depth. So thank you for all of you who did comment on this video. Or on videos earlier this week. So we'll start with Keith, who has questions about which kicker to start. So the kickers that were out there on waivers are Justin Tucker, who was dropped from his bye last week, Daniel Carlson, same thing, and Younghoe Koo, who you used last week. So, I believe you used him last week. So now the question is, who do you play for this upcoming week? So a big consideration to have as we get into the November and December games is the weather. So some of these kickers that are playing in places like the Northeast, so New England, New York, etc., there's a lot of high winds, bad weather. Buffalo is another example of this. A lot of snow, potentially a lot of rain if you're up in Seattle or even the Northeast as well. Whereas you have kickers that are playing in domes and they avoid all of that. So as we start getting into these later season games, really pay attention to the projected weather. And this is true for a lot of the flex positions as well. I don't think that really starts to go into effect until December timeframe, but you're starting to get to that point in the season where you're getting more wind, and that affects your kicking game. So that being said, for this week, Younghoe Koo is the only player who plays in a dome. I checked the weather for Sunday. So Justin Tucker plays in Baltimore for this week, and Daniel Carlson plays in the New York Giants Stadium, which is notorious for having heavy winds. This week, the wind does not look that bad up in the in the New York, Baltimore area. It's about 5 miles an hour up to 7 miles an hour. I don't think that's significantly going to impact the kicking game. So my recommendation in this is that you go with Daniel Carlson. I think Justin Tucker is a very close second. The only reason why I put Carlson over Tucker is because Vegas, I believe, will be settling for more field goals than Baltimore will. I think Baltimore, especially against Minnesota, will have the opportunity to score a lot of touchdowns, and Tucker may not necessarily get the field goals that you want. Carlson, I think, has that kicker formula that I talked about where they're going to settle for field goals more often than touchdowns. If the weather was bad, I would go with Younghoe Koo. The reason I'm not putting Koo above either of those two for this week with the weather not being great, or excuse me, with the weather not being a hindrance to the kicking game, is that they've got a pretty tough defensive matchup against New Orleans. So going to be putting Koo a little bit behind them, but those are all decent plays. Koo is another situation where the team, especially now that Calvin Ridley is gone, they're going to struggle to convert in the red zone and have to settle for field goals too. But I think the best kicking play for this week, just as an aside, is Jason Sanders, the Miami kicker going up against Houston, because, again, Dome Stadium for one, and then two, Houston is a bad defense. Miami also does not have a good running game, so this sets up perfectly for a situation where Miami is going to be driving down the field, kicking multiple field goals because Myles Gaskin is their running back, and could be a great outcome. So my recommendation for you, Keith, is first check to see if Jason Sanders is out there. If he is, I would play him, but if not, I would play Daniel Carlson. Questions from Andrew. There's a couple questions here, so I'm going to break it down question by question. As an overview, his lineup is Tom Brady, Chuba Hubbard, or is that the quarterback is Tom Brady, running backs Chuba Hubbard, Joe Mixon, James Conner, Alex Collins, Alexander Madison, Jeff Wilson Jr., Christian McCaffrey, wide receivers DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Terry McLaurin, Chase Claypool, and Christian Kirk, and Hunter Renfrow, and then tight end is Mark Andrews. So he's got an 8-0 record this season, so keep up the great work there. But couple questions for this week. So rest of the season, New Orleans or Dallas defense. So I looked at the schedule for these teams, and the nice matchups they have coming up are New Orleans has the Jets in the playoffs. They have the Miami Dolphins in the playoffs. They also have Carolina in the playoffs. So that, to me, you're playing for your playoff season when you got an 8-0 record, and you're looking at the last 4 to 5 weeks of the season. You've got the Jets. Tampa Bay is in there, so that is tough. But then you've got Miami, you've got Carolina, and Atlanta, which we don't know what their offense is going to look like by the last week of the season. But even if your format does not play a Week 18 playoff game, then you've got Carolina in Week 17, which is a very poor offense right now. So I would be all in on switching to the Saints. Dallas, on the other hand, has Arizona in that Week 17 matchup, which is going to be more difficult for them. So I would definitely recommend you go with New Orleans. Which kicker to take rest of the season? Greg Joseph or Daniel Carlson? Greg Joseph has been playing very well of late. But again, I think you look at these two offenses. Minnesota's got Dalvin Cook. They've got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. So to me, when you have three guys like that, you're going to be getting touchdowns quite often. Where you look at the best guys for Vegas, you've got Josh Jacobs, Darren Waller, and then probably Hunter Renfrow. And I'm not going to throw Odell Beckham into this equation yet because I don't know what's going to happen with him. But you're just looking at that, and that just screams like more opportunities for touchdowns with the Vikings. So I would go with Daniel Carlson rest of the season. The next question. So Hunter Renfrow or Chase Claypool for this week. Claypool has got a great matchup for this week, but going up against Chicago, but in terms of their passing game. But I think that I would actually be more comfortable playing Renfrow against the Giants because of that guaranteed floor value you're going to get, especially with Henry Ruggs out. You know Renfrow is going to get targets, and he's going to give you a solid baseline. Chase Claypool has struggled of late the past few weeks because Big Ben is struggling to get the ball down the field, which Claypool is kind of the guy who stretches the field. So the Bears are not a bad defense. They haven't been great against the pass statistically, but I would feel more comfortable going with Renfrow in this game because of the guaranteed floor value that you're going to get, whereas Claypool is somebody who you're taking a huge risk on. Other trade options to consider. So he's looking to upgrade his running back. Possibly consider trading Saquon Barkely. So he's looking at ways of upgrading your trades to basically improve your running back core. Does not have Saquon Barkley, my apologies. What are some recommendations? So a trade that he was looking at as of this morning was Zeke Elliott for Joe Mixon, Christian Kirk, and James Conner to acquire Zeke Elliott on his team. And that's a tough call because Mixon is a great running back. I do think Zeke Elliott is a better running back, though. Christian Kirk, to me, I would overall, my recommendation is I would make this trade. Christian Kirk is good, but and he's been a top 25 fringe wide receiver this season with some great games. Hopkins also missing some time, it looks like, for a little while. So I would still recommend you make this trade, though, because Kirk, to me, is somewhat expendable compared to the other receiving options that you have. Connor, to me, is very much a sell-high player because he's very touchdown-dependent. So you're giving up quite a bit to acquire Zeke Elliott, but if you can pull this off, I'd recommend getting Zeke Elliott onto your team. Also, a consideration is that Zeke Elliott has already had his bye, whereas Joe Mixon has not. So that's a good acquisition there. And then when Christian McCaffrey returns, who should you drop? So it's a tough call. I really am not an advocate of dropping running backs, but I think if you're going to drop anybody compared to your receiving core and running back core, it would be Alex Collins. He has not particularly been efficient this season, aside from one game against the Steelers. And Chris Carson, you never know exactly what's going on with him. So it is risky, though, to cut Collins because he could very well be the starter the rest of the season. But Seattle has not been a very efficient running game as it is. You don't drop Madison because of the value he could provide if Cook were to get injured again. So I think it's got to be Collins of that group. So thanks for your questions, Andrew. Next question is from Fantasy Football Helper. His question, I believe, was already answered for this week. He had Pittman that he was debating playing on a Thursday night. So if you already played Pittman, you got some decent value out of that. Not anything like it was in Week 8. But other options were Amari Cooper and Saquon Barkely. So I'm going to talk about them briefly in terms of what you do with them for this week if you have extra spots for them. I would recommend that Cooper is a play this week. Lamb is injured. Denver is a good pass defense, but I don't think it's intimidating enough to shut down Amari Cooper. So I would play Cooper next. And then Saquon Barkley, I think if at all possible, I would avoid playing him whatsoever because you don't know what's going on with his health in terms of the COVID protocol. You don't know what's going on with that either. So I think there's just too many question marks right now with Saquon Barkley, what he's going to look like coming back from his injury. I would personally avoid him. Speaking of Saquon Barkley, another question from another commenter, Mark. Should you be exploring a Saquon Barkley trade? So we're going to go through the breakdown of this question as well. So he's got Michael Carter, Cordero Patterson, Joe Mixon, Chris Carson, and Saquon Barkley as his running backs. He also, as receiver, has Corey Davis, T. Higgins, DJ Moore, and CD Lamb. And then asking if he should trade high potentially with Saquon Barkley as he's coming back from his injury. This is a super flex league also where he has Patrick Mahomes, Garappolo, Trey Lance, and Jared Goff. So there's a couple things I would try to do if you're in your situation. I think Saquon Barkley is a good trade candidate. I don't think you're selling him at your highest value right now, though, because he's kind of been disappointing this season. But I think it is worth trying to see if you can get somebody that could be more reliable, potentially like a Chase Edmonds. I think is somebody who is, I keep throwing out there as somebody that is a potential breakout candidate because of his PPR value and how explosive that offense is. I think Chase Edmonds would be, if you can get him for Saquon Barkley, I would definitely do that. Other things I would consider doing as well on your team. So in a super flex league, so you're locking in Mahomes every week. You've got Garappolo and Trey Lance that are essentially, Lance is kind of, I guess, in a sense, the handcuff to Garappolo. So assuming this is a 2-quarterback super flex and not a 3, I think Jared Goff is somebody I would cut to try to fill more running back depth on your team, or wide receiver depth even. Wide receiver is where you're going to need the most help. So if you can get use a trade to potentially for Saquon Barkley to get even another receiver too, I think that would be very beneficial for you. Corey Davis injured right now. I don't really know what his role will be when he comes back into the Jets offense, considering how well some of their guys like Elijah Moore played on Thursday night. And DJ Moore and Lamb. I think those are your two top wide receivers. Higgins is a fringe 3 to me, but I think what you got to try to do is free up some space to either add running back depth or wide receiver depth to try to give yourself some more balance there. And Saquon Barkley could be a potential tool to get you there, because with Carter, Patterson, and Mixon, those are pretty much going to be your guys that you put in as your 3 running backs. So I would look into doing that potentially if I were you. Chris Carson, we don't know what his health is going to be either, so I think getting some backup running backs or flipping Barkley into a receiver and then picking up a running back candidate off waivers is a good option for you. So that's all the fan questions for this week. We're going to go into some topics for the last 15 minutes of this video to talk some of the questions of what fans may have at each position in terms of where do you rank them. So we're going to start with the quarterback questions. I'm going to go through the start, sits, and comparisons for these players in particular. I'm not going to go into very nitty-gritty details of, do you play Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson? Because for the most part, you're going to play either of them, and you're not going to have both unless you have an incredibly imbalanced roster that just doesn't make any sense. So the most common questions, I think, would be Kyler Murray for one. Is what is his status going to be? Do you play him if he's playing injured? I think that if Kyler Murray is out there, I think you have to play him. There's very few people that I would consider playing over him, and that would be for a realistic scenario. If you had Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert as backups, I would consider playing one of them over Kyler Murray for this week. But if you go down the list of the player ranks of how quarterbacks have performed this season, I would not play Kirk Cousins over Kyler Murray. I would not play Daniel Jones. I would not even play Ryan Tannehill, even though he is expected to throw more often. And then I would not play Derek Carr in a positive matchup against the Giants. So I think that's where you draw the line, is around the Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow caliber quarterback. Otherwise, I think you play Kyler Murray. Speaking of Ryan Tannehill, what do you do with him? So there's a lot of different opinions in terms of how well he'll perform without Derrick Henry now. I think he will have a good game. I don't think it's going to be anything like any kind of world beater type game where he's up there all of a sudden with like the Matt Stafford, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes when he's playing well type games, but I think he will be serviceable. So for Ryan Tannehill, I think you play him. I would play him over Kirk Cousins, over Daniel Jones, over Derek Carr. I would not play him over Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow. So I would fit him right under Kyler Murray and how I would rank those tier of players. Sam Darnold. So what do you do with him? He's questionable for this game. If you're in if you're in a 1 quarterback league, Sam Darnold doesn't need to be rostered at all. But if you are in a 2 quarterback league and you're trying to figure out what to do with him, I think there's a lot of other guys that you could pivot to that I would be more comfortable with. For example, Matt Ryan against New Orleans, I would feel more comfortable there, even though Matt Ryan has not really been anything special himself. I would probably play Mac Jones over Sam Darnold with an injury, because Mac Jones at least does not turn the ball over like Sam Darnold does. I would not go down to the depths of Trevor Lawrence because he's got Buffalo this week, or Baker Mayfield because he's playing hurt and not really putting up numbers at all this season. But I think for guys that I would definitely consider playing over them, Tua Tagovailoa, I would play Tyrod Taylor. And I think that's probably where I draw the line right there. But those are guys that I would play over Sam Darnold. So then with Sam Darnold, what do you do with P.J. Walker if he plays? I would personally just avoid it, because P.J. Walker, he's a good running quarterback, and he's a serviceable enough game manager to get by, but I don't think that will translate into a lot of stats, or at least a reliable amount of stats, so I would personally just leave him on waivers. And then the last big question is Trevor Siemian. I think a lot of people were expecting Taysom Hill, myself included, but now Trevor Siemian is out there. So what do you do against Atlanta, which is a positive matchup? So let's take Trevor Lawrence, for example. I would personally rather play Trevor Siemian over Trevor Lawrence. And that's purely matchup. If he was playing any other team other than Buffalo, I would rather play Trevor Lawrence, but I'd go Trevor Siemian here. Jimmy Garappolo against Arizona, which is the number 2 pass defense. In that case, I would probably go Garappolo over Siemian. And I think that comes down to the degree of weapons on that team. Is that San Francisco, especially with the expectation George Kittle is coming back, Garappolo will have more weapons than Trevor Siemian will. So now we move to running back questions. So the biggest question for running backs is, what do you do with Christian McCaffrey, Chuba Hubbard? Christian McCaffrey expected to play. I'm not super confident if he will, but if he's out there, you have to play him. There's no doubt about that. He's consistently a threat to just put up monster numbers. You have to go with that. But if he is out, I think Chuba Hubbard is a good play this week too against New England. New England is not the best of pass defense or rush defenses as they've been in the past. They're only 18th this season. Additionally, New England. Additionally, the volume that Chuba Hubbard gets is positive enough for you to roll him out there with confidence. I would still play Chuba Hubbard in the event Christian McCaffrey's out, but I would not play him over some guys in the fringe that we'll go into in a sec. These are some of the guys I'm considering along here. Jeremy McNichols. I would play Jeremy McNichols over Chuba Hubbard. Darrell Williams, I would still play Darrell Williams over Chuba Hubbard. Things like that is what I would recommend. Another injury going on this week, so we've got James Robinson questionable to play with a heel injury. You've got Carlos Hyde as the backup. So, again, if James Robinson is out there, you play him. Carlos Hyde, to me, is a very limited upside player who I really do not feel comfortable in a lot of situations playing. However, there are some guys that I would prefer over him, or I would prefer Hyde over. So for me personally, Jordan Howard would be one of those against the Eagles. He had some good games, but Jordan Howard presents limited pass catching upside. Hyde will at least give you the volume that you would like. I would slightly prefer Boston Scott over Carlos Hyde because of the projected passing upside that Boston Scott can give you in a game where Philadelphia will probably need to throw quite often because they're going to be behind. I do like that over Carlos Hyde. I also like Carlos Hyde over the Baltimore Ravens running back situation, even with Latavius Murray out, because you're going to be splitting it with 3 players, and you never know how much volume any of them are going to get. So you go with the volume of Hyde, even in a tough matchup over the Ravens situation. And then other potential considerations, Adrian Peterson coming into his first game. I would go Adrian Peterson here personally because it's a better offense and they've got a little bit easier of a matchup, even though they've got a tough front line against Aaron Donald and the Rams. Other questions, Darrell Williams and Gore. What do you do with them for the Chiefs? So personally for Darrell Williams, I would play him. Gore had some very... I think it was like a fluke game, to be honest. I think the Giants had a game plan where they were going to shut down Travis Kelce. The short game was going to revolve around preventing him from going off. So the Chiefs adjusted and were able to get Gore involved in a few plays where he played pretty well. But I would not chase that from a week-to-week basis. Darrell Williams, I would feel more comfortable with against the Packers in a game where they should be leading that game and being able to run the ball. But Gore, to me, is too much of a risk. What do you do with Josh Jacobs coming off an injury? He's got a decent matchup against the Giants. I would play him in a lot of situations. I would play him. You're looking at guys that are around the same range of projection to Josh Jacobs. I would play him over Devontae Booker on the opposite side. I would play him over Myles Gaskin. I would play him over Elijah Mitchell, who's potentially injured right now. I would It would be close with him and Zach Moss, but I would still feel more comfortable playing Josh Jacobs. And I would possibly consider Darrell Williams over Josh Jacobs because of the projection that they will score more than the Raiders. But Josh Jacobs is expected to have a big role in this game. I think he has a very positive matchup against the Giants. There's not a lot of people that I would generally want to play over him for this week. In that same fringe of players around the top 20 to 40 running backs is what I'm generally referring to there. Elijah Mitchell, we just touched on him. What do you do with him? So I would personally, coming into this game, he's got an injury designation and he's questionable. I would personally rather sit him for this game. There's not a lot of people that I would want to play over him because this is a team that likes to run a committee. Elijah Mitchell has emerged the last few weeks as their best running back, but I think it would be best if you tried to sit him. Zach Moss, I would play over him. Damian Harris, I would play over him. Khalil Herbert, if David Montgomery is still out, I would play Khalil Herbert over Elijah Mitchell. Guys like that. I don't think I would go as far down as Carlos Hyde, but I would still play Elijah Mitchell. I would still sit Elijah Mitchell over most of those people. Yeah. And then what do you do with the Titans situation? Jeremy McNichols and Adrian Peterson. McNichols has been heavily involved with Derrick Henry there anyway in games where the receivers are out. So McNichols has familiarity with this system. He's a good PPR running back. If you're in a PPR league, I think McNichols is a play. I would play McNichols over a lot of people, actually. I would play him over Myles Gaskin. I would play him over Devontae Booker. I would play him over the Carlos Hyde situation, the Elijah Mitchell situation, the Zach Moss situation. I would not go as high as Chase Edmonds. I would still play Chase Edmonds over Jeremy McNichols. I would play him over Melvin Gordon, even though Melvin Gordon is had some consistent value this season. I think McNichols has potential for a great game as he is the most familiar running back with the system. And then the Eagles running back. So I talked about them a little bit. Boston Scott, I would play in a lot of these situations over these guys that I've been talking about, like the Damian Harrises, the Zach Mosses. I would not play him over Melvin Gordon. I would not play him over Devontae Booker, but I would play him over Myles Gaskin. So I'm looking at guys in this fringe range of these like running backs 20 to 40. So that's generally what I would recommend with them. And then a sleeper for this week, A.J. Dillon. So A.J. Dillon, Green Bay is expected to go off their running game a lot because they're going to be relying on a second-year quarterback with his first start. So A.J. Dillon has some potential upside. I would grab him if he's on waivers. I would not play him, though. Wide receiver questions for this week. So what do you do with Devontae Adams? You still play him, even though Jordan Love is playing. That is not a question to me, even though some people will make it to be. Deebo Samuel, currently calf injury. If he's out there, I think you still have to play him because of the volume that he's getting. CeeDee Lamb is in a similar situation where he sprained his ankle in practice, but you have to play Lamb if he's out there, especially given how explosive the Cowboys' offense is. DeAndre Hopkins is expected to sit, so even if he is out there, I would not play him dealing with a hamstring injury. Amari Cooper is dealing with a hamstring injury too, but he it's a mild one where it didn't affect his performance in the past week. So I would still play Amari Cooper, and Robert Woods is a good play as well going up against Tennessee. So these are more of the upper tier type of players that I like. How I would rank them if they're all healthy, I would say Adams 1, Samuel 2, Lamb 3, Cooper 4, and Woods 5 in that order that I talked about. Hunter Renfrow, what do you do with him? I think he is a great play for this week. I've already talked about him a little bit, so I won't go into him in too much detail. But Renfrow I like over a lot of people this week because of that floor value that he gives you. So Renfrow, I would rather play Renfrow over Jarvis Landry. I would rather play him over Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. I'm going to talk about them in a sec. I would not play him over Brandon Cooks and Jalen Waddle. I think those two will have good games going up against each other in bad defenses for Houston and Miami. I would play Renfrow over Christian Kirk. Chase Claypool is already discussed, and Julio Jones coming off an injury. So there are a lot of people that I like Renfrow over because of that floor value that he's going to give you, and especially with Ruggs' situation, there's going to be more involvement for Hunter Renfrow. We talked briefly about Sutton and Judy already, so we'll go back to them. One of them is going to draw Trayvon Diggs. The other one has a matchup against the 25th ranked defense in the pass defense. So you're playing high risk, high reward with either of these players. I don't know for sure who Diggs is going to cover. I think he will most likely cover Sutton because Judy's still recovering from an injury. Might be a little more the Dallas might be a little more willing to let him try to beat them. So we'll see how it goes. I don't feel super confident in either of them, but those are some good plays potentially. Like if you got somebody like Christian Kirk, I would still play either of these Denver receivers. I would still play them over the Giants situation with all of their injuries going on, and Devonta Smith, who has been pretty disappointing for the most part in fantasy football. Other situations to consider: Van Jefferson going up against the 32nd ranked defense. Is he a flex consideration? If you're very desperate, I think he could be. Jefferson is very much a boom or bust type of play week to week. But I think if you've got him, so a comparison, Tajay Sharp is somebody who is going to get some more volume potentially with Atlanta, but it's questionable how much. I would play Tajay Sharp over Van Jefferson to be safe. Darnell Mooney is around that fringe as well. I would play Mooney over Jefferson because Mooney is getting more involved. But other ones around there, Marquez Callaway, I would not play him. He's projected to be the top Saints receiver, but the Saints receiving core is just an absolute mess. It's like the Baltimore Ravens running back situation is how the Saints wide receiver situation is. So real quick, we're going to talk tight ends, defense, and kickers in the last few minutes of this video. So tight ends I like. So the question about what do you do with Kyle Pitts and his poor game last week, you still play him against the Saints, even though it's a tough matchup because he's going to potentially get a lot of volume with Ridley out and Pitts adjusting to the game with all his potential. George Kittle, what do you do with him? So if you've got Mike Gesicki, I would play Mike Gesicki over George Kittle. CJ Uzama, for example, though, I would play George Kittle over him. That just is kind of a comparison of players. Tight ends I like for this week available on the waivers. You've got Dallas Goedert, good matchup against the Chargers. Cook going up against the Eagles. Same game, both good opportunities for the tight ends there. Tyler Conklin I really like too. He's got the weakest pass defense against tight ends for this week. He does get decently involved from time to time as well. So I like his chances against Baltimore to have a good game. Guys I don't like, Dan Arnold. People keep hyping Dan Arnold as somebody who's getting a lot of volume, and he does put up some decent games where he gets up to 15 points. But I think in a game against Buffalo, I'm just not entirely sure how good this offense is going to do at all, and I would just avoid Arnold. Evan Ingram, he had 10 points last week, but he also had 3 receptions for 15 yards and a touchdown. Just stay away from Evan Ingram. And then another guy I would avoid for this week is Tommy Sweeney, who's got a good matchup against Jacksonville, but as a backup tight end, I don't really know how involved he will be in order to justify his potential. Defense. So there's not a lot of good defensive streams for this week, to be honest, and a lot of that is because the bad defensive matchups are going up against offenses that don't exactly inspire confidence either. So we've got Houston and Miami playing each other. I don't think you can justify playing either of those two games because they're both bad defenses. The offenses, I think, will put up enough value for them to make it so it's a high-scoring game. So I personally would avoid that whole situation. You can also make the argument as well for San Francisco's defense going up against potentially Colt McCoy. If Kyler Murray is out, I would not go that direction either. Or the Chiefs if Jordan Love is out there, and I would personally not do that either. So there's only a few okay plays that are likely still available to me, and that is the Raiders against the Giants, because with Daniel Jones, there's always the potential for turnovers. And for Carolina against New England, because New England, I think this game is going to be a slog, and there's potential that Carolina at home could generate some turnovers that could give them some good value there. Kickers. So we talked a little bit about kickers already in this video, but the ones I like for this week, I've already touched on this a little bit. The ones that have a formula where their offense is good enough to get into the opposing team's 25-yard line, red zone area, but they're not going to convert for touchdowns. So guys that fit this formula: Daniel Carlson, Younghoe Koo, Jason Sanders. Kaimi Fairbairn has got a good opportunity this week. Houston's playing Miami. This Houston-Miami game for kickers is going to be a gold matchup, because both these teams, poor running games, but good enough offenses against bad defenses that they should be able to at least get into field goal range for the whole game. And then another guy that I like is Mason Crosby. Going up against the Chiefs, they should be able to get down the field, but with Aaron Rodgers out, how Jordan Love is going to do converting in the red zone is a question mark. So Mason Crosby, a good smash pickup for this week. And then if you want to employ the kicker trick, then pick up Chris Boswell against the Bears. And what the kicker trick is that if you know your opponent doesn't have anybody in the Pittsburgh-Chicago game on Monday night, if you pick up the kicker for that week, what you can do is give yourself a head start on the waivers for the next week if you've already locked up the league, or locked up the win for that week. So let's say you're up by, he doesn't have anybody playing in that game, and you're up by 20 points, or even if you're just winning in general, and you know you've already won that week. So rather than put the kicker out there, what I would try to do is drop Chris Boswell, pick up somebody like Alex Collins who might be out there, somebody like, there's not really another, maybe Jamal Williams if he's out there, or like you can take a flyer on Jared Patterson, but something like that I think is going to benefit you more for the future than holding on to Chris Boswell. So you can employ that trick if you feel confident that you can still win that week over that opponent. So that's all I got for this video. Let me know what, like I've said earlier, let me know if you have suggestions or things you'd like to see moving forward that would help you, things that you've enjoyed from this channel or things that you'd like to see, and I will try to implement that as we go through the rest of the season and in preparation for next season as well. All right, I'll see you guys later. Good luck this week. Bye.